Ever heard about those guys? The ones who come from absolutely nothing and end up unbelievably rich and powerful.
Oh, yeah, those rags to riches stories.
Yeah,
Classic.
well, Samuel Zimmery is one of those guys. Arrived in America at 14, no money, nothing. And get this, he died a very rich man in the grandest house in New Orleans. Makes you wonder how one life can hold so much, right?
It's definitely a story that grabs you. And it's not just about money, right? It's about ambition, resourcefulness, and, well, let's be honest, the impact of building a global empire is a mixed bag.
And that's what we're getting into today. We're going deep, a real deep dive into the life of Samuel Zimmer, the Banana Man. And we're using Rich Cohen's book, The Frog That Ate the Whale, to guide us.
It's an amazing book full of incredible details about his life in the banana trade.
It is. And the goal here, for you listening, is to give you a clear picture of this pivotal piece of American and global history. We're doing the heavy lifting, so you don't have to.
Exactly. We're sifting through all the details and pulling out the most interesting stuff about Zemurray's character, his business smarts, and, well, his legacy, which is definitely a topic people have strong opinions about. We want you to come away from this with a real understanding of this guy.
So let's start at the beginning. Where does a story like this even begin?
Well, it starts in Bessarabia, Russia, in 1877. Now, Bessarabia is part of Moldova today, but back then it was Russia. And Zemurray's early life, well, it wasn't easy. His father died when he was young, and his family had very few options, let's put it that way.
Tough start.
Yep.
And then at 14, he comes to America.
Yep, 1891. Immigrated with his aunt. First they landed in New York, but pretty soon he moved down to Selma, Alabama, where his uncle had a store.
Alabama must have been a huge change from Russia. What do we know about his early days in America?
You know, even though he was so young, everyone said he seemed older, more mature, like he'd already seen a lot in his life. He worked all kinds of jobs, cleaning houses, delivering things, even operating a lathe. And what's important is he saved up enough money to bring his whole family to America.
That shows real commitment.
Yeah.
So how does a guy who's cleaning houses and running a lathe become the Banana Man?
So the story goes that he saw a banana for the first time, and it was like a light bulb went off in his head. He instantly saw the potential. Buy them at the port, sell them for a profit. It wasn't just a piece of fruit to him, it was an opportunity.
A real entrepreneur. And that takes him to Mobile, Alabama, right?
Mobile it is. Now, back then, Mobile was this bustling, kind of rough port city. It was a melting pot of people, lots of action, and, well, maybe a little bit of shady business going on.
So what was the banana world like in those days?
Mhm.
I'm guessing it wasn't the super organized global industry we know today.
Not even close. Imagine a pyramid, right? At the top, you had the owners, the guys with the money. Then came the ship captains, then the dock agents and inspectors. And at the very bottom, the laborers. A lot of them were African Americans and Sicilian immigrants doing the really tough work.
So where did Zemurray fit in?
He started at the very bottom, selling ripes. Now, ripes were bananas that the big traders wouldn't even touch. Too ripe to ship inland, they just tossed them aside.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Right. What others saw as garbage, he saw as a chance to make a buck. It's this contrarian way of thinking, this willingness to go against the grain that would make him so successful.
I hear he even had his own steamships pretty early on.
Oh, yeah. By 1905, just a few years after starting out, he had a fleet of side-wheelers going back and forth to the Gulf of Mexico. He was also traveling all over Honduras on a mule, getting to know the land, where the bananas were actually coming from. That dedication to understanding every part of the business, that's how he got those nicknames. Z, the Russian, Sam the Banana Man. The locals called him El Amigo and the Gringo.
Okay, there's this story about him outsmarting Secret Service agents in New Orleans. What does that tell us about him?
That story shows you how quick he was on his feet, how he could think outside the box. Cohen doesn't give us all the details, but it sounds like he was involved in some deals that maybe weren't exactly by the book, but the way he handles the whole thing shows real resourcefulness. And it gives you a sense of New Orleans back then, a place where, well, maybe the rules weren't always followed so strictly.
New Orleans, the home of Storyville at that time.
Exactly. Storyville, the red light district, was a big part of the city then. So Zemurray was operating in this environment with a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of, well, let's call it risk.
So Zemurray's making a name for himself.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the first banana guy, was he? Who were some of the pioneers who came before him?
That's a great question. The banana trade really got going in the late 1800s, and there were a few key players. Lorenzo Baker, a sea captain. He was the first to bring bananas from Jamaica to the U.S. back in the 1870s. It was a big deal. People describe tasting a banana for the first time as a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
It's hard to imagine now bananas being such a novelty.
I know, right? But back then, it was risky business. You had to deal with spoilage, bad weather. It was a real gamble.
And then came Andrew Preston, right?
Yes. Andrew Preston saw that bananas could be more than just a novelty. He thought, let's sell them cheap, make them affordable for everyone. He teamed up with Baker, and together they founded the Boston Fruit Company in 1885. They ended up controlling something like 75% of the market in the U.S.
That's huge. So a banana empire was born.
Yeah, but there was a catch. They were getting all their bananas from Jamaica, which made them vulnerable. If something happened in Jamaica, their whole business was in trouble.
Makes sense. Who else was shaping the banana world back then?
Well, you've got Miner Keith, who was down in Costa Rica building railroads. He realized how much money could be made from bananas and formed the Tropical Trading and Transport Company. He grew tons of bananas and eventually sold his whole harvest to Boston Fruit.
So these early pioneers, they were the ones who made bananas a regular part of the American diet, right?
They were clever marketers, too. They made bananas seem almost miraculous, saying they were germ-proof in its skin. This was a time when food safety was a big concern, so that really appealed to people.
Interesting. So we've got these big players in the banana game, and Zemurray starting to make moves beyond just selling those ripes. How does he get into large-scale banana growing and ultimately end up going head-to-head with United Fruit, which was the successor to Boston Fruit?
Around 1910, Zemurray decided to start growing his own bananas. He bought up land along the Cuyamal River in Honduras. The soil was great. The climate was perfect. He knew this was the key to controlling his supply, not just relying on what other people grew.
But it wasn't just about owning the land, right?
Yeah.
He needed to make deals with the Honduran government.
Absolutely. He got what were called concessions. Basically, these were deals that gave his company, Cuyamal Fruit Company, all kinds of advantages, like not having to pay taxes and getting special rights to use the land.
Sounds a bit shady by today's standards.
Yeah, it was. But back then, those kinds of deals were common in the banana business. The profit margins were tight, so you had to keep your costs low.
Okay, so setting up a banana plantation, that's got to be a massive project. What was involved?
It was backbreaking work. You had to map out the land, clear the jungle, plant the rhizomes, then constantly fight against weeds. Cohen actually said that weeding on a banana plantation was like breathing. And then there was the whole thing with drainage and silting, making sure the plants didn't drown or get buried in mud. It was incredibly labor-intensive.
And he needed a way to get all those bananas to the coast, right?
Right. He built his own railroad to transport the bananas from the plantations to the ports. Controlling every step of the process, that was his way of making things efficient and keeping those costs down. He was all about vertical integration.
And then the Knox Plan comes along. This sounds like it was a direct threat to Zemurray's whole business model. What was that all about?
So the Knox Plan was cooked up by Philander Knox, the U.S. Secretary of State, and J.P. Morgan was backing it. The idea was to help Honduras consolidate its debt with American banks.
Okay, sounds reasonable enough.
Except there was a catch. Part of the plan was to get rid of those special concessions that Zemurray had negotiated. Remember, those concessions were what allowed him to keep his costs so low. The Knox Plan threatened to take that away.
So Zemurray was going up against the U.S. Secretary of State and J.P. Morgan. That's bold.
It was. He told them straight up that his investments were based on the existing agreements, and those agreements needed to be honored. Knox basically told him to butt out, but Zemurray wasn't backing down.
And that's what leads to the Honduran Revolution, right? A revolution backed by, of all things, a banana entrepreneur.
It's crazy, right? Zemurray was not going to let the Knox Plan ruin his business. So he came up with this plan to basically overthrow the president of Honduras, President Davila, who seemed open to the Knox Plan, and replace him with General Manuel Bonilla, a guy Zemurray knew and trusted.
Orchestrating a regime change to protect your banana empire. How do you pull that off?
He hired mercenaries, these larger-than-life characters like Lee Christmas. Christmas was a railroad engineer who loved speed and adventure. There was also Guy Maloney, a tough soldier who'd fought all over the world. And get this, Zemurray even got his hands on a warship, the Hornet, a former U.S. Navy vessel.
Wait, she had his own warship?
Through a third party, yeah.
Yeah.
The first attempt at the revolution was a bit of a mess, but Zemurray learned from it and came back stronger.
So they just sailed in and started a war.
Pretty much. They attacked the Bay Islands first, which were poorly defended. They took Roatan, then went for La Ceiba, a key strategic city. Christmas's tactics were all about speed and aggression. They even salvaged this giant Krupp gun from the sea and used it in the fighting. The fall of Lasiba was a huge blow to the Davila government.
And Zemurray was behind it all, protecting his business. This wasn't just about a few banana plants.
He was determined to win, to protect what he'd built. He was a self-made man, and he believed in himself, believed in his ability to overcome any obstacle. The Honduran Revolution, or the Banana War, as some called it, it wasn't just about money, it was a battle of wills.
So Bonilla comes to power, and things are looking good for Zemurray's business. We hear he was a tough businessman, maybe even ruthless.
Yeah, he was known for being hands-on and uncompromising. There's this famous quote attributed to him, "A mule costs more than a deputy."
That's pretty telling.
He always denied saying it, but it reflects the way people saw him. And then there's the story about how he basically ran Jake Weinberger, an older competitor, out of business.
So, not afraid to play hardball. But he wasn't just a bully, right? He also came up with new ways to grow bananas, ways that made things more efficient.
Absolutely. He was a real innovator when it came to plantation management. He started using selective pruning, which was a pretty radical idea at the time. He improved the drainage systems, figured out how to use silting to his advantage as a natural fertilizer. He even had them staking individual banana trees to protect them from the wind and help them grow straighter. These methods really boosted his production.
From battling governments to figuring out the best way to grow a banana, Zemurray did it all. And then we have this clash with Huey Long, the governor of Louisiana. That must have been a meeting of two very different personalities.
They were. On the surface, they had some things in common. Both came from humble beginnings. Both were Democrats. Both had some issues with the New Deal. But deep down, they were very different. Long, he wanted to shake things up, redistribute wealth, basically tear down the system. Zemurray, he wanted to reform the system, make it work better for him, but keep the basic structure in place. Zemurray saw Long's populist rhetoric as a threat, especially his Share Our Wealth program.
And Long wasn't shy about calling Zemurray out.
Oh, no. Long accused Zemurray of exploiting Central America, of using American military power to protect his interests. He painted Zemurray as the ultimate greedy capitalist. It was a clash of ideologies and style.
And now we come to the story behind the book's title, The Fish That Ate the Whale. Zemurray's takeover of United Fruit. How did he pull off this David and Goliath move?
Well, the Great Depression had hit everyone hard, even a giant like United Fruit. Zemurray saw an opportunity. He'd built Kremimel into this lean, mean, profit-making machine, and he knew United Fruit was struggling.
So what did he do?
In 1933, he walked into a United Fruit board meeting, armed with enough proxies, those are votes he controlled through shares owned by others, to give him control. He basically said, "You guys have messed this up. I'm taking over." And he did. He forced out Victor Cutter, the president of United Fruit, and took the reins.
Talk about ambition. And once he was in charge, he didn't just sit back and relax, did he?
Not at all. He was hands-on, traveling all over Central America, visiting plantations, ports, railway lines. He even talked to the workers in the fields, wanted to see everything for himself, figure out how to make things better. He brought his deep knowledge of the banana business to the top of this huge corporation.
But United Fruit wasn't just facing financial problems. There was this growing threat of disease, right?
Sigatoka disease, that was the big one. It was a fungus that attacked banana plants, turning the leaves black and ruining the fruit. The Gros Michel, or Big Mike, the banana that everyone in America knew and loved, it was especially vulnerable.
So a disease that could wipe out their main product, and then World War II starts.
The war changed everything. German U-boats made it dangerous to ship bananas, and the British government declared bananas a non-essential food. United Fruit lost a lot of ships to torpedoes.
Sounds like a disaster.
It could have been. But Zemurray, he was a survivor. He got United Fruit to start growing other crops, hemp for rope, quinine for malaria medicine, even rubber.
From bananas to wartime essentials. Yeah. And during the war, he also suffered a personal tragedy, right?
Sadly, yes. His son, Samuel Jr., was killed in the war. It was a devastating loss for him. It just goes to show that even behind these powerful figures, there are real human stories.
And then there's this whole other side to Zemurray's life, something that most people don't know about his involvement in the creation of Israel.
It's an amazing story, and it shows a different side of him. After the war, he became close with some of the top Zionist leaders, people like Chaim Weizmann. He secretly supported the Brecha, this underground network that was smuggling Jewish refugees into Palestine, which was under British control at the time.
The Banana Man helping to create a country. How did he do it?
He used his connections and his money, put pressure on Central American governments to give those refugee ships flags of convenience. He helped find ships and connected Zionist agents with people who controlled the ports. And he wanted to keep it all secret. Some people even think he might have influenced the UN vote that led to the creation of Israel.
That's incredible. So after the war and the creation of Israel, Zemurray went back to United Fruit, but he was getting older, and there were new challenges brewing, especially in Guatemala.
Yeah, he was in his 70s by then, and he was starting to have health problems, Parkinson's disease. And then Jacobo Arbenz came to power in Guatemala, and his government started talking about land reform, taking away some of the land that United Fruit owned.
That must have worried Zemurray.
It did. Zemurray and a lot of people in his circles, they saw Arbenz as a communist threat. So he hired this guy named Edward Bernays, a real PR genius. Bernays spun the whole thing, made it seem like it wasn't about land or money, but about stopping the spread of communism.
And then the CIA got involved.
Right. They orchestrated a coup in 1954, overthrew Arbenz. It's kind of like a repeat of what happened in Honduras, but with even bigger consequences.
And those consequences were pretty bad, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. The coup led to decades of instability and violence in Guatemala, a brutal civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And ironically, it also helped radicalize people like Che Guevara, who saw the U.S. intervention firsthand.
So Zemurray was nearing the end of his life, but the repercussions of his actions were still unfolding. Did he ever think about his legacy, all the things he'd done?
There are some hints that he did. He supposedly said all we cared about was dividends. Maybe he was realizing that the pursuit of profit had come at a cost. He tried to improve United Fruit's image, invested in some social programs, but the damage was done. United Fruit eventually became Chiquita, but even then, they were still dealing with scandals, like the Bananagate thing.
So Samuel Zemurray, the Banana Man, an immigrant who became incredibly powerful, left behind a legacy that's as complicated as his life.
He's a fascinating figure. His story is a reminder of how American business, global trade, and politics are all intertwined. He was a driven, ambitious guy, but the way he did things, the impact he had, it raises some big ethical questions.
And for you listening, you now have a deeper understanding of this key player in history.
Here's something to think about. Was Samuel Zemurray a visionary entrepreneur who overcame the odds to build a global empire? Or was he a ruthless capitalist who exploited entire countries for his own gain? Maybe he was a bit of both. It's up to you to decide. And think about this. What happens when someone has that much power? What are the long-term consequences, not just for that person, but for whole nations?
If you want to learn more about the story, you should definitely read The Fish That Ate the Whale. And if you're really interested, look into the history of the banana industry and the U.S.'s role in Central America. It's a story that still resonates today.
That's it for our deep dive into the life of Samuel Zemurray. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little challenging. Join us next time as we explore another captivating piece of history.